It's my honor to be able to introduce our moderator for our first panel. His name is Ed Gilligan. He's from Cochise County. He's the administrator and was appointed to the position in February 2017 after serving as deputy administrator. Previously, he spent 16 years working in the Arizona Superior Courts, holding positions of Chief Adult Probation Officer, Juvenile Court Services Director, both in Cochise County, and Treatment Program Coordinator, Unit Supervisor, Drug Court Coordinator, and Probation Officer in Pima County. In 2014, he was appointed by the Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court to serve on the state's Mental Health Court Advisory Committee. He helped to develop very important specialty courts. Additionally, he's an award-winning trainer, amazing, in the areas of evidence-based practices in community corrections and nonviolent intervention, as well as criminogenic risk and needs assessment. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Arizona, and then also holds a Master of Science degree in management from the American College. Ed, would you like to come up? If the panelists for the first would like to come up, if you'd enter on this side. No fighting now, guys, no fighting.
So, good morning, everyone. What you just heard was the long version of what I have done in my career. The short version is, I'm just a guy who can't hold a job. I'd like to introduce on our panel a gentleman who is the absolute opposite of what I am in a career. He is a man who certainly can hold a job. Captain Don Bischoff of the Mojave County Sheriff's Department, who is the jail commander there in Mojave County, and began his career there in 1987, the year that I left high school and began college jumping and gallivanting around the country. He has been instrumental in a number of programs there. You will hear about partnerships and collaboration that is driving solutions in Mojave County and borrowing solutions from other places and other jail systems in the state. The other Don on our panel, but no ordinary Don, is Mr. Don Jacobson. Don works for the Arizona Supreme Court as a senior special projects consultant. His career has largely been in court administration, but I can guarantee you with some certainty that he is probably the only electrical engineer in the building this morning.
There you go.
So congratulations for taking 4 years to decide that that was no way to make a living. Steve Julian, who is the Navajo County Criminal Justice Coordinator, is on our panel today. That job is fairly new to Steve and fairly new in the state of Arizona. Steve, like myself, spent a good part of his life as a probation officer. Clearly the best profession that there is. And to any probation officers in this room, I thank you for what you continue to do. And it certainly makes a difference for the folks that we are most concerned with here today, that being the mentally ill in our system. Steve will have an opportunity to talk about many of the initiatives there in Navajo County. And one of the primary factors to consider there certainly is the financial distress in Navajo County. A rural county in Arizona, and certainly a county that is facing some very, very significant economic strains right now, and yet is making progress in very important initiatives. And our final panelist today is Khalil Rushdan. I, like many people, am a sucker for a superhero movie. I recently watched one of the Avengers movies, the best one, in which Superman, who had been deceased, was brought back to life somehow by some electrical engineer or something, a lightning man.
They do it all.
But to me, in learning about Khalil, his experiences and his impact for folks, especially in re-entry, frankly, I was struck with the reality that he's the Superman on our panel. He's a superhero in Arizona. And his work and work of many other mentors and advocates for people is critically important. And he'll have an opportunity to talk about that work in smart justice partnerships and the issues throughout our state. One of the things that we really want to focus on as we have this discussion is the decade that's upon us. Okay? We just got done with our fiscal year 20 planning, and we are many years into the Stepping Up initiative in Arizona. And yet, none of our 15 counties is a model county in our country. We have work to do. And so as we open this discussion, I want to really focus on the work Steve's doing at really the tip of the spear in focusing on training and other opportunities in Navajo County. And Steve, if you would, just kind of bring us up to speed on the current state of initiatives there in Navajo.
Thank you, Ed. 2 years ago, I started in this position, as you mentioned, as just retiring as a probation officer. So I was somewhat familiar with the courts and with the treatment providers in our county. But when I started this position, it was really a new direction in trying to intercept our persons with mental illness out of our system early. And I found the easiest, I shouldn't say easiest, but the most effective way I could initiate something quickly was to convince law enforcement in our area of the need for mental health first aid and CIT training. Our police chiefs were committed to that, but they were unwilling to proceed ahead until they were confident that the trainers that their police officers were going to have for mental health first aid were their own folks, their own officers. And none of them wanted to proceed ahead until we got their officers to be the actual instructors for their field officers throughout the county. So fortunately, the NARBA Institute stepped up for us. The Northern Arizona Regional Behavioral Health Association stepped up and funded some officers to receive the public service component of the mental health first aid training. And we now have that in progress throughout the county monthly, trying to get our officers trained in mental health first aid by other officers, trained by other officers. And that's progressing ahead. We hope for 100% of our officers to be trained and dispatchers. And we've also started our CIT program 2 years ago. We've run 3 classes now in Navajo County. That wasn't an easy sell at first. We have a lot of small agencies in Navajo County, police, law enforcement agencies. And when I explained to them that this was a 40-hour course, many of them looked at me rather reluctantly that there was no way they were going to be able to give up officers from the field for 40 hours at any given time, so we had to adapt our program and make it a 4 10-hour CIT program, 4-day CIT program that spanned 4 weeks, and try to do 1 day a week for 4 weeks so they could manage the loss of personnel and get them into our training. Out of 3 classes now, we have 39 officers and dispatchers trained in CIT, but this is just the beginning. We really want to move forward with that, and we're hoping for another class to begin in October. And I could go on at once.
I think what is a real standout in terms of the efforts there in Navajo County, rural Arizona composes the vast landmass of our state. 2 largest metro areas around Phoenix and Tucson certainly have a lot different opportunities and kind of fall into that traditional model of CIT training with a small percentage of a workforce trained to respond on each shift as specialty responders to come and support in calls. And the picture in rural Arizona is it doesn't work real well because we've got a whole lot of small police departments, sheriff's department that's spread out over thousands of miles. And with all of those departments and all of that different leadership, really unifying those folks and moving them together with one common focus to try to get that training to every officer. And I think for the state, probably an opportunity in the future as we look at the real challenge there. How do you integrate that in a law enforcement training academy? As a fundamental, essential skill for officers working throughout our state. Captain Don, who's made a career in the Mojave County Sheriff's Department and specifically in the jail and improving services there, has impressively relied along colleagues in the state to borrow and implement programs and initiatives along to advance stepping up and decrease the population of mentally ill in the jail there and to improve services for them when they are there. Don, if you could expand on the current state of affairs and the significant progress there and some opportunities as we move forward.
Sure. I'd like to first state that I've never been on probation before. However, I am in jail, so I don't know what that says to me. But I will tell you that the majority of my law enforcement career is on the streets, and just the last 6 years now, this month actually, have been in the jail. And although it's law enforcement, it's about 180 degrees different. You have a different perspective, a different view of everything. I've even come to enjoy some conversations with attorneys now. But the one thing that I would say is that I will speak for our county, and we talk about rural Arizona, rural communities, and we're faced with challenges. We all are, even the big counties, the metropolitan areas. Don't get me wrong, they have their challenges as well. They're just different. The issues that we all face are relatively the same, but the resources that are available and the solutions that we bring to solve some of these issues are different in every community. So you eloquently say that I borrow ideas from others. I just flat out steal them. But You know, we can look for areas where people have had some successes, and we can figure out, and I'll use Yavapai County. I think that for rural Arizona, or a lot of Arizona, they're really blazing the trail for a lot of us to follow. But what they're doing is not going to work 100% in my county, and it's not going to work in Navajo County. But we can take that and figure out how we can make it successful to some degree in our area. And I will tell you that I think that in my county, one of the issues that, or the gap in our attempt to address these issues have been the officers on the street. And I say that with love because that's where I come from. But sometimes the fastest and the easiest way to deal with a problem from a law enforcement perspective is not always necessarily the best way to deal with it. The judge alluded to the fact that once this person gets into the system, it's hard to get them out, and the outcome is usually going to be very predictable. It's going to be probation, jail, or prison, and it probably, just continues to repeat. So we're trying to attack things in the middle to divert people out of the system, but our focus now has shifted to try and keep them from entering the system to start with. And I will tell you, in my rural part of the state, that has been a challenge, and that's with the officers in the street, is to identify the resources that they have to divert somebody out of custody when they can. That's not always possible, but they have to realize that there are some resources that can help and that may keep this person from getting into the system to start with, because it's very true. Once they enter the system, it's hard to get them back out, especially the longer they're in it. So right now, our focus just recently has really been, dragging, sometimes kicking and screaming the street officer side of this component to the table and say, look, we need to do something different here if we want a different outcome. And so we've identified that we can probably get the mental health first aid training to them as an easy sell, especially when you attach the post-continuing education credits. They like that. That's very appealing. The CIT training, Steve is absolutely right to try and talk to a law enforcement administrator and say, we need X number of officers for 40 hours. And it's not for tactical this or, specialized training here or anything else. This is, something to try and address the mental health issues in our community. And that's, from a rural perspective, it's hard to lose those officers for 8 hours, much less for 40 hours. So you have to look for a different way. How can we make this work? And I think in Navajo, and I think Yavapai, some of the other counties, they've taken that 40-hour training and it's over a period of time that they can make that happen. So it's easy to always say no. We need to look for the ability to say yes and find the areas that we can be successful, or I think we can, and focus our efforts there. And I can tell you in Mojave County, that's what we're trying to do. It's a big task, but we recently had a meeting here a few weeks ago, and we actually had a representative of every one of our law enforcement agencies at the table, and they were very receptive to the mental health first aid training. That's not going to solve the problem, but it's a big step, and it gets us heading in the right direction. So that's kind of what we're doing.
As we navigate our way through the discussion this morning and certainly into the afternoon, we've probably got some audio challenges, so I think we'll all try to use our outdoor voices and our booming jail commander voices.
So do I need to, nobody heard any of that? Do I need to repeat all that?
I heard it fine.
Don heard me, so.
Certainly when you mentioned stealing ideas, it drew me back to a podcast I recently listened to about the concept that's a challenge for a lot of folks, that we are all criminals. And it was an extraordinarily interesting discussion, not necessarily about stealing ideas plagiarizing the work of other government officials, which is an absolute compliment, but that through the course of our lives we have all made some significant mistakes and sidesteps, and many of us have simply avoided arrest. And certainly I think as we encounter this issue throughout the state, that's one of the sobering realities in working with everyone in a criminal justice system around this issue of mental health, and never losing sight of perspective on the challenges and issues that other folks face in their lives. Coordinating efforts between organizations, and I think one of the cornerstones of Captain Don's ability to have success in Mojave County is that in his career, he worked in varying capacities, and with that it brings perspective and credibility to the conversations in trying to get other groups of professionals to work differently and adapt to new ideas and help other parts in this continuum in corrections and at other intercept points. The Supreme Court is working on a number of initiatives to advance stepping up and positive strategies statewide. Don Jacobson is in the catbird seat in working at reform programs there. Don, where are we in terms of building coordination through state courts and with our initiative?
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Well, where we're at, well, I tell you, I do have my
back inside.
Here,
back inside.
That worked okay? Okay. I've never had a problem being heard. That's always one of the things that's just part of who I am. You know, we're kind of at this midpoint. If you recall, if you look in the court system, if you look in the judicial branch, about 10 years ago, we had the opportunity and we started the process of developing mental health courts, and they've been very effective. They've been very well received, both through prosecutors, defense attorneys, law enforcement. It's been part of who we've become. But the thing about mental health courts, and I echo back to what Justice Gould said, once a case gets started, it has that momentum. It has that process it flows through. And mental health courts are a bit of a diversion. They move people away from the center process into kind of a parallel process in the system. But they don't move people out of the system. And this is one of the things that I think we in the courts have started to realize. We have created a process whereby, yeah, we can work with people, we can help them, we hopefully get them treatment. There's things going on that are better than the regular process for them, but it's not truly getting them out and getting them away from the system. Because what happens when mental health court ends? What happens to these individuals? If they don't continue in the treatment process that was encouraged and basically mandated from them during the mental health court process, they often fall back again. We see recidivism, we see repeat offenses, and it goes through the process all over again. And some mental health courts have actually taken on the process because of the need. They say, well, once you've been through our mental health court once or maybe twice, well, we're not going to let you come in again because obviously it's not working. So then where do we go? And what happens to these individuals? So what's been happening is we've got this great program. We started the mental health courts. About the last decade, we've seen them grow. They're throughout the state. They're throughout the country. But what do we do now? Because the mental health courts only touched on one intercept point and only helped in a great capacity, but also in a limited capacity. So what we've done now is we've tried to expand this to all 6 intercept points, 0 through 5, and looking at all those places and what is the court role in that whole spectrum, the whole process. Because while law enforcement's out there working with those folks on the street, and the jail is dealing with those that are booked, and the prisons are dealing with those that are sentenced, the court has a kind of a central role. And I'm actually very jealous, Don. I got to tell you, and Steve, both of you guys, you mentioned the CIT training, the mental health first aid. We got none of that. I mean, if you look at it, you say, well, we got the officers out there in the street doing the work, having that direct contact, but these people end up in the courtroom too. And we don't have any of that kind of training for judges to recognize the issues, for court staff to learn de-escalation and some of the process. None of that's happening within the court system. So we're far behind. The judicial branch is behind the 8 ball on this one. We're trying to catch up with where the rest of you guys are in terms of this understanding and this level of process that you've put out there. So we're trying to catch up in that area. We're trying to catch up in understanding how we can then actually divert people at those various intercept points along the way. Now, I got to tell you, even though we're trying to catch up, I think we've got some great progress that we've made. I'm going to brag a little bit about Arizona, going to brag a little bit about what we've done here. I was up in Idaho a few weeks back at the Conference of Chief Judges. And we had basically everybody from Texas, Alaska, Hawaii, Guam was there, everybody on the western side of the United States. And we started talking about what are you doing in your courts? What is each state looking at? And you know what happened? Arizona kind of floated to the top and said, we're doing more than anybody. And I was actually surprised by this. I wish I could say I wasn't, but I thought we have so far to go, we have so much to do. I thought we should be kind of in the middle of the pack somewhere. And it turns out we're way ahead of the game. One of the things that we've started to do, one of the things that we've been focusing on is getting the sequential intercept model concept out there to the judges. We had a summit this last spring, and honestly, it was the first time many of our judges heard this concept of the sequential intercept model. It's been around for years, but we haven't really incorporated it and gotten to the point where that's become part of our thought process to be thinking in these terms. So we began that process with our judges. We then expanded this. We partnered with the State Justice Institute, the National Center for State Courts. We have now developed a curriculum to train individuals in each jurisdiction to go out and map those intercepts. Not just to map them, but to actually create protocols in relationship to them. We have 3 things that every jurisdiction in the state is now encouraged to work towards. They are to, first off, find a way to identify those individuals that have the need. There's got to be a way to say, these are the people we need to divert. These are the people that need the services. Secondly, identify those services that are available. I was amazed. We had a training just last week up in Flagstaff, and one of the most amazing things to me was finding out what we're actually doing. You know, you have people like Mojave, like Navajo, like Yavapai. You've got these various counties doing lots of great things, but we're not sharing that information. We need to find channels to share that information, and then find out what's available in our communities. So identify the people, identify the resources, and third, and crucial to this, is identify the pathways to get those people with the need to the resources that match those needs. And we've developed this training. We've actually had our first session ended last Friday. I can tell you this, 14 of the 15 counties and the 6 largest municipalities on the judicial branch side have gone through that training now. We're only missing 1 county. This is a very small county, and we're going to work with them on that. So we have all 15 counties covered on this. They can go out now and start mapping that process, start looking at those various intercepts and see where they go. We also invited folks from the Western region. We had individuals from Idaho, Oregon. We had numerous states there, Colorado. We had these states coming in, and they are now starting to look at that too. So with our partnership with the National Center, as well as the State Justice Institute, we're going to make this curriculum available not only in this state, but also actually nationally. It's going to go out nationally, the curriculum we developed. So we're starting to have an impact even beyond the borders of Arizona. But we've got a long way to go. So the next decade, if you will, the past decade has been focused on mental health courts. The next decade is focusing on everything else. Getting our staff trained up to know, to recognize, to learn how to respond to those with behavioral health issues that come into the court system, as well as finding those roads, those places that we can then begin to find out roads. And that's where you guys are going to come in. You're going to have to be our partners in this. We're going to depend a lot on you. So I'm making myself available. Please, we need your help. Telling the judges, here's how you map it, and finding those roads are 2 different things. And it's going to be a bit of a haul for us to get there. So we need your participation. We need your help in that. So I'll get off that issue, but I just want you to know I'm here to plead for your assistance. in this process. And I want to thank you for your willingness to do that even ahead of time.
Committed leadership is one of the cornerstones of successful stepping up initiatives. And there is no greater leadership for every court in this state. And it's such a, when you step back and look at the complexity of our court system, hundreds of individual courts, municipal courts, justice courts, superior courts throughout the state, all under individual leadership, many elected officials, and that guidance, that leadership, that initiative from the state Supreme Court focus on three essential elements all across the board. Let's get everybody speaking the same language with the same fundamental foundation of skills and information is absolutely such an incredible and positive step forward to strengthen the services we provide and ultimately divert people from a system in which the courts sit really smack dab in the middle of in the processes and programs that are offered folks. Spinning out of the corrections world and re-entering communities is one of the real chief challenges and the most vulnerable points in the system for individuals who are suffering from mental illness. Khalil's work largely focuses on empowering and assisting those individuals at that critical point. And he brings a wealth of perspective for all of us in how we strengthen our services at that point and try to keep forward momentum with folks who are now out, our goal of out, to keep them from ending up back. Khalil, your perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So, I start every morning by eliminating the red tape to treat each other like a human being. A lot of times we forget to do that. I take a proactive approach to these issues because I feel anytime I'm reacting to something, I've already lost. And that proactive approach allows me to apply solutions real time, especially where you have somebody who is in the system, who has not fully embraced the environment. I'm going somewhere with this. And then they get out, and now they're back in society or somebody's household. And then they have a problem, they have a issue with adjusting. Problem with that is most people don't identify or they're not aware that incarceration itself is a trauma. And they come out, that trauma is compressed because they're mandated to get a job, they're mandated to maybe take substance abuse counseling, and there's a long laundry list of things that they're obligated to do, whether it's parole or probation. And it's not, and I'm not knocking either agency. I'm just talking about the realities of the person coming out. So most people don't identify having a mental illness to even get to the services that are out there. And the longer that they're incarcerated, the more or the bigger the issue is with mental illness. So what I do is I'm on the front line trying to connect them to services, because most people get their list of obligations and they're gone because the other illness that I've identified as anxiety And that anxiety goes up because on their back continuously is the notion that if I don't do everything on this laundry list, I'm going back to prison. In some instances, I've heard it firsthand from parole and probation officers that if you do not do X, Y, and Z, you will go back to prison. So, I was a sports guy, and it's hard to make free throws when you got a lot of anxiety. And the work I'm doing is trying to get that anxiety down, so not only can the person complete their obligations of parole and probation, but then also start a healing process. And that's the key thing that's missing. Most people come out of incarceration and they forget to heal. They're looking for forgiveness from, people who may have been victims or people they've disrespected by stealing money from or whatever. And they're willing to patch up and forgive or build those relationships or look to build those relationships. But the biggest thing is they forget to forgive themselves. And they carry that on their backs along with all the other things that they're obligated to do. And, with all the pressure that is on their back, how can we ever expect them to perform? Or how can we ever expect them to engage? Or how can we ever expect them to start the healing process? So, it was easier for me to sit on the sideline and say, hey, you know what? I came out and I was successful after a 15-and-a-half-year sentence. But I really wasn't. I walked out, there was a big gap in my life missing. And I associated my time as just being, hey, I was in the wrong place, wrong time. I was prosecuted. I never even looked at incarceration myself as a trauma. And, I'm looking across this room, and the key people that are missing, I like who's in the room, but then who's not in the room. And it's communities of color. Because when I talk about mental illness or mental health in my community, people's first assumption, hey, I'm not crazy. So it's harder for them to embrace any type of resources out there or to even address traumas when they're already feeling, hey, I'm not crazy, I don't need that. And, that's where being a frontline advocate for change, being a mentor, case manager, I have to get the people who are really not understanding what mental illness is to identify their own, to get connected to the resources so we can start the healing process. Because the whole notion of self-medicating, that's the part that starts to become or is being criminalized. Where we see small amounts, we see people who are getting charged with Class 6 felonies going to prison because they have, rolling papers or 1 or 2 joints of marijuana or small amounts of drugs. And, it's sad because where I come from, looking deeper into the issue, poverty itself is a trauma. Communities where there's a lot of poverty, that's not a normal environment. It's an abnormal environment. So people say, well, how did you get to the ACLU? Which is one of my hats. So last year, the ACLU engaged they started to engage in a national campaign to reduce the prison population by 50% and combat racism within the criminal justice system. And people hear that number 50% and they say, wow, that's very aggressive and ambitious. And when I break it down to where you cannot incarcerate mental illness out of a person, or you cannot incarcerate addiction out of a person, when you start to put those two groups of people together, and you start to see how much of our prison system or our prison population it makes, we're almost at that 50%. And, I love the work I do, and most people think because I'm an advocate, and I'm a strong advocate, that I'm afraid to sit down when it's time to apply solutions and be at the table. No. It doesn't matter. If we're moving in the right direction, if we're bringing solutions, if we're keep people connected to the resources, invite me to the table. But if we're going to do the same talking and disconnecting or sending people to jails and prisons, I don't want to be a part of that. So that's pretty much what I've been doing.
It's frankly an insightful observation and a significant challenge to think of a system, this entire system of criminal justice, and the need to, within that system, from the earliest point of intercept, of community police on the scene, all the way through our community supervision, corrections, community-based interventions after release. This idea of reducing anxiety in an anxiety-ridden system is really an extraordinary challenge, and yet extraordinarily simple in the most fundamental ways of human connectedness and understanding. So, thank you. One of the themes that comes up all through this as we create new interventions and systems is certainly evidence-based practice. What does the research tell us we ought to be doing in corrections? Another word that came up this morning in the introductory comments was creativity. And I'd like the panelists as professionals and practitioners to reflect on, again, science or creativity? In the next 10 years, where are solutions going to come from?
I'll go ahead and speak to that. Last year or 2 years ago, our Navajo County Juvenile Detention Center was closed. It was closed for financial reasons, and that forced creative thinking. And our probation chief decided to try to come up with an alternative program in conjunction with our school superintendent. And they have since created a program that kids can be assigned to as an alternative to detention that includes schooling at an alternative school in Holbrook, Arizona. It includes after-school programming that lasts several hours. That includes a variety of things, life skills, cooking classes, washing machines, and learning how to take care of your clothing, ironing, arts classes, a music room that has is loaded with guitar equipment and drums, and a sound room, and the kids just love it. I mean, the kids are thrilled to have this opportunity. And mixed in with this is the local provider offering the life skills and counseling services that the kids may need. And this is happening whether they're access qualified or not. They've also, next month, there's going to be a group home started at the probation department, actually right at the probation department, that is going to be facilitated by a clinical director. And they're going to be housing some of these kids that need a respite away from home temporarily, and these kids will be able to attend this schooling, and while their parents in some cases are also receiving counseling services on their parenting skills. So I guess my point is that yes, we lost the detention center, and as Joel Davoskian was saying to me earlier today, he's on our second panel today, losing a detention center because of financial issues can force change, and it can force creative thinking. It's not always a bad thing. It gave us other ideas, some new ways, new direction to go in. So.
First, the creativity, and then the science, which is more of a challenge here. On the creativity side, what's one of the biggest things that we've been working towards is to go beyond just our kind of a siloed approach that we have in the court system. And we have family courts, and we have family cases. We have juvenile court and juvenile cases. We have criminal court and criminal cases. We have civil court and civil cases. We have probate court and probate cases. We have created a system that isolates these different case types into different case processes. And yet what we found is that the individuals are sometimes one and the same. So one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest places of creativity for us has been to say, let's not look at it on a case process basis. Let's start to look at this on a person basis. And that's a whole new way of thinking. This is a huge sea change in the thought process of the judicial branch. We've always dealt with case processing on the case side. Now we're shifting, and we're starting to get this thought, how do we deal with it on the person side? Civil commitments in Title 36, how do those relate into probate? Well, wait a minute, that impacts the entire family, and there's juveniles involved in that process. And you just go on, and they may have had criminal issues associated with it. Bringing those things together into a comprehensive whole and saying, let's treat it. And that's part of the advantage of the sequential intercept model, is it creates that concept of you go beyond just the role of the courts into the role of the entire process, and even outside the criminal justice process. Because the sequential intercept model focuses on criminal justice, but what about before an individual comes in contact with a police officer? What is going on in the community? How can we encourage and participate in that process? So that's the creative side. On the science side, I'm going to talk about it. It's a challenge. Because we want to create programs, we want to do processes that we know are effective. We don't want to just say, well, this sounds like a great idea, let's try this, and not know whether or not it has a good impact. We want to have that certainty that what we're doing reduces recidivism, encourages participation in treatment, and has that kind of impact. And this is the challenge. Because we've created all these silos, because we've created all this separation in the process, and people can go into a treatment center, and there's HIPAA laws that are protecting those records. They can go into jail. They can go into juvenile. We have all these things that created these isolated systems. Our biggest challenge has been to look at and say, how do we create a system that allows us to talk to each other, that allows us to share that information? I'm going to give kudos to Yavapai County, which has done a lot in this in their jail population. I know they're in the room somewhere. I don't see you guys, but hey, there's David and Bea. All right, we got people here. They've done a lot in starting to create this process. And I think we need to take those concepts, those ideas, expand them out, and see some great things. So that's also creativity, but it's part of the science-based challenge that I think we face right now.
So scientifically, that concerns me. And it concerns me with the notion because a lot of times you have to do research. Somebody takes that research, compiles it into a report. Somebody looks at that report, then they have to put a plan together, course of action. And from that course of action, it has to be implemented. The time frames of that. And, when you're talking about something that's, I mean, this is a national issue, but let's talk about the state of Arizona. That becomes more complicated when you look at time frames, because, you know, it may take 1 to 3 years for research, might take a whole nother year to compile that into a report, and then it may take another couple years to implement the changes that need to take place. At that point in time, you know, and I tell a lot of the guys I work with, what good is a sandwich today if you were hungry yesterday? A lot of the, you know, by the time we start to implement things, the problems at the core have shifted. So, you know, a lot of times I see we apply the wrong solutions because the problem has become outdated or it has morphed into something else. The creative side is, I look across this room, I've been all through this state, and with the notion of bringing people together, sitting at tables with very conservative Republicans, and you know, I'm like, look, how much do you want to bring a solution to the table? And they say, hey, this is impacting us directly. At that point, it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. It doesn't really matter what your occupation is. You know, we have to remember to be human first. Because I like the program that Stephen was talking about up there, because it allows people to engage at multiple levels. And as community, when you start to look at being diverse and more inclusive, then you start to bring new ideals to the table. Now you also have more hands that can help you with the healing process, that can help you with applying these solutions. And then you also have more feet, because if it's not working, you can run away. No. But scientifically, you know, I'm very optimistic about the change, but you know, 30 years ago, they used to tell us milk did a body good. And then a new report came out that says it no longer does a body good. So you know, that's where I'm at. And it starts with community. Once you put the community together and the people are all on the same page with the same intentions of treating people like human beings, then you can see the beauty that really is produced out of that.
I just want to say real quick that the program that we've started for Navajo County that started for juveniles, I'm not sure, maybe Don can help me, but I doubt that AOC has ever spent as much money on guitars, sound rooms, drums, art supplies, and the like, and life skills training, washing machines, cooking supplies, gardening tools. I don't think...
It's not standard to buy that stuff for court personnel. Yes,
right.
That's true.
So it's a refreshing change, and certainly when I attended the AOC Supreme Court conference in March, it was talking about protocols to deal with the mentally ill. Certainly, one common theme that I heard over and over again was, yes, we have this mental health protocol for our courts, but they were asking, at the end of the day, they were asking us for creative ideas. How are we going to solve these problems? And I know that every jurisdiction is handling them differently, whether it's Judge Huerta in Mojave County, Judge Little in Payson. Every court is handling things a little differently, but they're all creative ideas to resolve this problem in their jurisdiction. And I'm encouraged to see the change, and I'm encouraged to see DOC or AOC leadership. Thank you.
So everything that everybody has said so far, I think, really covers it. Creativity, science, it's both. The science part of it, I think something that I know, at least in my part of the state, that we've not been good about collecting the data. And we think that there's a problem, but we can't really show that there's a problem. We don't know, how bad the problem is, So we need to gather the data. We need to get the information and we need to continue to evaluate and reevaluate that information. The creativity, I would say that it's about having the right people at the table as you begin to try and address these things. Don has mentioned about we have these processes created and silos, and not everybody fits into one of those categories. And we can create these processes and have these silos and think that that's going to address the problem, but in reality, it's not. And a lot of these issues, he used the analogy of criminal court, civil court, probate court, juvenile court, domestic relations court, it runs the gamut. But a lot of this stuff just kind of commingles and co-occurs, which is exactly the problem that we have with mental illness. It co-occurs with other things, homelessness, substance use. So there's just not a one-stop shopping approach. And I didn't know that, the court would pay for washing machines and hose and rakes and stuff.
Well, we focus on the guitars.
But the guitars.
And the drums, that's where we really like
and the drums. So, but I think that if you look at that, I'd mentioned earlier, it's easy to say no, and it would be very easy for the AOC to say, are you out of your mind? We're the court. We're not going to buy a washing machine, a guitar, and a set of drums. We're the court. That's not what we do. It takes people, for the law enforcement, we know that domestic violence and the cycle of abuse, it just continues unless something from the outside interrupts that cycle. And this is it. It takes somebody that's willing to say, we need to do something different. Maybe if we did buy some guitars, and we could have a different outcome. So it takes people that are willing to come to the table, realize that there's a problem and that something different needs to take place to have a different outcome. And I really think that that's the key to it. And finding these creative ways, and what we do in Mojave County may never work in Navajo County or down in Cochise County or Yuma County or even Maricopa County. But some of the concepts and some of the ideas and some of the approaches could. And I think that's the thing to focus on. And I would just say one thing. In my county, we had a chief deputy county attorney, Jay Sack, I think he was in that position for 30 years. But he was the chief deputy prosecutor for the majority of my time on the street, and I learned a lot from him. He's a pretty gruff and grumpy, rough around the edges kind of guy, but I learned a lot from him. And I think one day I was irritated probably at him and his office and a decision they'd made, or some of the challenges that I was facing in dealing with something. I don't even remember what it was now because it was way back in the 1900s. But his response back to me was, well, Don, if it was easy, anybody could do it. And that stuck with me all these years. If it was easy, anybody could do it. Well, this is not an easy issue to address, because if it was, it would have already been dealt with. And it's not. And it's going to take people that are willing to step up and take on the challenge and try and get through these barriers. Trying to get people that are already in the system to consider a different approach. Just in the last couple of weeks, I've dealt with submitting applications for 2 different defendants in my custody for getting them into a return to competency program. And what I had identified is that if I left it up to the attorneys to complete the application and compile all the things that are necessary to build that packet to get them into a competency program, it's not going to happen. So I took that on. A lot of that information, if you've ever compiled one of those, a lot of that information has to do with a lot of jail information, a lot of our incident routes, classification, jail medical records, and everything else. So really a lot of the information that goes into there comes from the jail anyway. Obviously, the jail has skin in the game. Why don't you let the jail do that? I'll reach out to the prosecutor and defense attorney, whoever I need to get that information to plug this in. But otherwise, this is just not going to happen. Everybody's busy, but in the meantime, this person is sitting in jail and they're decompensating. Let's move this along. So an experience that I had last week is the application was submitted in this person, but it was lacking one thing, an unredacted copy of Rule 11 valuations. And I couldn't get it. So it's like, I don't want to read it. I can tell you what it says. It says the person's not competent, but they're restorable. Or I wouldn't be going through this process. I'm sure that this is what the court has determined. There's no secret in this report. But we need it for the application. We need it because it's part of the process. But the process and the people in the process have gotten so accustomed to that process that it's like, well, you can't have that. What do you mean I can't have that? I'm doing the application. So, well, that's HIPAA and this, and it's a sealed record and everything else. I can tell you what it says. Your defendant's not competent, but everybody thinks he's restorable. Am I wrong? I don't need to read 22 pages of report to come to that conclusion because that's what it says, or I wouldn't be doing this application. So, and there's probably more information in the 400 pages of medical records from the jail than there is in that evaluation report. But that's the system. And it's not conducive to, how can we move this along? How can we do what is in everybody's best interest here in spite of the systems that we've created sometimes? So I would just, I don't know if we're done, but I would just leave you with the comment that if it was easy, anybody could do it. And because that's really resonated with me from Jace.
And what stands out to me in this foundational discussion here of guided by creativity, guided by science, that in the work we do, we absolutely want to be mindful of what the work of researchers has provided to us as practitioners in criminal justice. Tells us what works and what doesn't. There have been myriad things we have created that end up making people worse. And so we don't want to do that. And at the same time, that loud and clear message that as people who work in a complex system, that what we don't want to do is get bogged down in the bureaucracy of creating new systems and neglect the urgency of the issue at hand with getting the mentally ill population out and into treatment instead of into years of processing and reprocessing in a criminal justice system. In the very final minutes we have in looking at this next decade, you open a newspaper and you read about indications of economic recession. Markets are in decline. Are we going to have it? It's going to happen. When is it going to happen? It will happen at some point. When we look at a 10-year period next decade, it's probably going to happen, okay? And recessions are traumatic for government officials. I have a mentor who frequently reminds me that you should never let any good crisis go to waste. And very quickly, for our panelists in reflecting, at the point that our communities, our governments, our institutions face economic despair, what possibly might we do to seize the moment and move this initiative forward? How could we capitalize on that?
I'll go. I mean, I don't want to make it sound so simple, but I mean, start building authentic relationships within the community. I mean, because that's what's going to weather any storm, the relationship you have, and with the notion that economy does crash, you still have those relationships, and you have more people at the table who can help bring resources. You know, I mean, it's happening now. You know, we created this unofficial Arizona village of a lot of formerly incarcerated people who want to bring changes, and you know, they just didn't have the platform. So there's a lot of people out here who come together, who are assisting officials at multiple levels, and that's where I start by just bringing that community together and have it be sincere. So,
Sincere, authentic relationships are absolutely free of economic cost, rich in economic benefit. Any other final thoughts before we send this home and take a break? Yes.
Yeah, I agree. So much with the relationships thing, and part of that is a change of the mindset and the culture. One of the things that changes and keeps us on course through tough times is having that shared and the common goal of what we're trying to get to. If what we're trying to get to is get disruptive people off the streets, if what we're trying to get to is get cases closed, if what we're trying to get to, if our mindset, our goal is about doing these things, that's a very different thing versus a mindset and a culture that says we want to treat the people that come into the system well. We want to help them. We want to see things accomplished. That's a different attitude, and it's a different mindset. So one of the things, I guess, to answer your question, if we're going to weather economic storms, we have to be able to change the culture in which we are working and operating under based upon the purpose for which we are doing what we're doing. And that can then keep us on track regardless of economic or struggles that are going out there.
Yeah, and I would add to that, doing nothing is rarely the right option. And I would also say that everybody can do something to affect some level of change even today, this very day. A small victory is still a victory, and no matter what the economy or the next 10 years has in store for this issue or any issue for that matter, it's always easy to say, no, well, we can't do this because we need to find the areas where we can have some success, no matter how small or big, and that's where we need to focus our efforts. So if there's a downturn in the economy, then maybe there's going to be fewer areas or smaller victories. But it doesn't mean that those opportunities are not going to exist. We just can't say, no, we can't do this because this grant funding that we had no longer exists. We just need to find ways to do it. We need to find ways to make the change that we know needs to take place.
And I'll say, too, real quick, DOC approached me a couple of years ago. Carrie Hyatt, who was here just a little bit ago, was telling me that the governor's office and the Second Chance Act was supportive of trying to get reentry coalitions started throughout the state. We've worked on that in Navajo County, and these are using services and pastors and the faith-based community to try to get involved and understand what they can do to try to help people that are re-entering our community from jail and prison. We have a cohesive group now together trying to offer their support, and some of the pastors have been in prison. They're familiar with the system and they're offering their help, something that they cohesively could not or were not doing in the past, and that group existed. They're going to exist whether there's a downturn in the economy or not, and just getting them aware that this is something that they can do to be helpful is something that will sustain regardless of what happens to our economy.
Thank you. Share with you, final thought. Pass to me in note form. It doesn't say get me out of here. This final thought, we have more time than money. And that is absolutely and most certainly the truth as we work through this process, an urgent process, an important process. And I want to thank all of you for spending time out of your busy professional lives to come here and have an opportunity to collaborate, gain some new insight and some new energy to go back and continue to tackle the challenges in your jurisdictions. With that, round of applause for our first panelist. They will be circulating if you have questions. I'm sure that they have insight they'd like to continue to share. Thank you.
They're open.
Sure.
It's just paper. Oh, sure.
Sure.